to the Berg Podcast. Thanks for joining us today. With me today is Ford.
Hey, how's it going?
And Dan.
Hey, everybody.
And today we are talking about something that impacts a lot of industries. Seems to be like the talk since 2020 or maybe even before, but the skilled labor shortage. The difficulty finding enough people to fill the roles that you have available. And we're going to dive into it. See if we talk about some things that we do and maybe see if we can talk through what some solutions could look like.
You know, one of the things Ford actually saw it this morning. I was coming in, sometime before 6:30, and I saw a couple of our guys pulling out from Wawa. And there's so many trucks at Wawa in the morning. And as I drive to work, I drive west to go to work. So I drive into realistically where the workers are coming from. So where the work gets done is a little bit further west in our geography. A lot of the companies are based out here, and you'll see them driving in the morning, driving towards, not towards the city, but realistically closer to the city. So those like collar counties. And so it struck me, I knew this was going to be the topic today. And it just sort of struck me that there's so much workers that are moving into these areas. And I think part of the problem with the skilled labor is something we went back to about, how we marketed ourselves as a blue collar industry over the last 50, 75 years, that there's not as many workers coming from the area that we're working in, so it's almost like you have to, we set up these companies and we have these operations that we want to run. And the people that want to do that live a little bit further north or west in our geography. And then they go towards the areas where the development's occurring. And the development's definitely crept out. There's development out here and west of us. But it's an odd sense in the little pocket, in the micro of where we are, that a lot of the work comes from north and west and into the collar counties of Philadelphia. And you see it, and there's so much hustle and bustle every day. So much of those trucks and the, whether it be the pickup trucks or the concrete trucks or the triaxle trucks, all those trucks moving down to do work. But yet I was thinking there's all this work, and if people saw it, they'd be like, look at how many people are working, and yet we're still so short.
Right. Yeah. And I was thinking about it a little bit too. And I was curious if either of you think that part of the shortage is because of more work opportunities, right? Are there more businesses doing the similar things that need the same workers?
I'm not sure if it's that or if there's so much other work that requires a limited skill set and a limited easy access to that they don't actually jump in. I mean, I think we're going macro versus micro. I mean, I think that the difference here is that, like, for years, we just did what we did. If it was up to me, there'd be no names on trucks. There'd be no names on equipment. There'd be no names on shirts. We just did what we did. Like, I'm old school, even though I'm not as old. But, we've learned we had to adapt. And so we're doing things differently. But for so long, there was just people available. And so nobody told the story. Nobody told the positives. And they allowed other people to fill that space with another conversation that drove people to do other things. And so, I mean, that's like the big global piece of this. But I think that there's a lot of new jobs that have come out because of technology, other things that has allowed people to work. But instead of like staying with something, I mean, I think we'll call it the gig economy, where people can just kind of work for a while, then jump in, jump out, versus like trying to create a career and stick with something when it gets tough. Then we can get into, we're raising people. We can get real far into like a lot of things and get real deep, but
get into the weeds quickly.
Yeah, right? Exactly. But I think that's part of it. And I think the unique thing, as you were saying, there's a Wawa right here outside of us, is reference number 2 for having a drinking game. But, our area has a very heavy, strong work ethic. And so if you sit on 23 between 5 and 7 a.m., the amount of workforce that you see going, you're like, oh, that's got to be enough. And it's not.
Right. Yeah.
And I think a lot of other places, I mean, this is a national or maybe international problem. So maybe other places have a different vibe to it than we do. But, it's just across the board. In other places, they don't have that kind of similar pocket of workforce that we might have in our local community.
Yeah, and I think that it's actually the opposite of your initial question, is that other jobs have developed that people can now do that maybe are perceived to pay more, or maybe are easier, in terms of the physical nature of it.
Right.
So when the world has changed, other jobs came up and people are able to do those jobs. And because of the blue collar world as an industry not marketing itself, people went away from that lifestyle, that ethic. And because of that, there's a shortage of skilled workforce there. Now that leads to a bigger question, like, Amazon can't hire enough people to work in a warehouse. But you sort of, in my mind, you play backwards and you have to get back probably to the point where the shortage started, which could have been, 1980. I think we try and look at it in a microcosm, but I actually think if you look at it in a bigger picture, like go back to when, you guys were 2 and I was, 10. And realistically, if you were going to get something, you went to like if it was school, we were going to order stuff from Sears, and it might be from like the Sears catalog, or maybe you would go to a store, you know what I mean? And there was malls, but not many. Now there's so much more of everything, whether you think about pharmacies, if there's 5 pharmacies, there's, 4 places you could buy the stores. There's an Amazon distribution facility that has everything you could want that can be delivered to you in a day. Mm-hmm. Each of the simplicity of getting that stuff faster and having more options creates the need for more people to do a certain level of work. And over time, I think it's worked our way into our society where if you went back 50 years, maybe the biggest industry is, construction, or maybe it is, it could be any number of things in that blue collar world. But if you just say construction, and I'm taking that big picture globally, everything from, from the clearing to the guy that does the trim work in the final piece, that was probably a very large percentage of the industry. Now you look at most job breakouts and it's healthcare, warehouse logistics is a big one. You have all these things that really didn't even exist as a measurable number. Hospitals is a good example. I guess another one is if you had to go to the hospital 40 years ago and you lived where we lived and you had to go like a children's hospital, if you were lucky enough that you lived near here and you could go to CHOP, you could go to Philadelphia. But now there's 12 CHOPs that all do varying degrees of that. And same thing, any of the hospital chains around here, there's hospitals everywhere. So some of these industries have just absorbed people and grown exponentially. Mm-hmm. And that's great because people say, well, yeah, everybody's working, but you can't create the things you need to support those entities. You see it with the chip factories now and everything else. You could build the chip factory, but they can't build the houses to support where the people would live to work at the chip factory. Yeah. So I think that's the problem, is there's more jobs and we haven't shed light on our industry to make people want to work here. Yeah.
Not so much more competition inside of construction, but more competition in general for the same workers. Is that what you're saying?
I think so.
Right?
Yeah, that's what I think.
Well, I think that's too, if you think about like where new stuff is happening, if we look across the country, people are putting potential for jobs in places where there is nobody. Like they're like, because everything is at a level now, there's a guy sitting in an office in Chicago throwing a dart at a wall and says, we're going to build a warehouse in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. You know what I mean? Like they don't, like there isn't that, I think that's part of it too, as you're saying, like there was one local pharmacy that you knew the pharmacist, and now there's 4 name brands on the corner of the same street. It's transitioned. It's a much more mobile workforce. They move, they transition out, they don't stay close to home. All those types of things. And, another thing I don't think we talk about enough, but the rules have changed for us, right? Like the paperwork that's now included for people to join our industry, well, not difficult, but it is something that we have to, we have to e-verify because we do work with local municipalities and stuff. And, when I grew up, when I started doing construction, cash was king,
Sure.
You got done at the end of the day, guy gave you $100 or something for your day, and you went off to went off on your way. And that's just not the way that I mean, I remember there was an old developer. I don't know if he's still around, but I was a kid and we were working for him. And he used to tell me that like when he started out, every Friday they'd take a cigar box full of cash and go pay their guys in cash. Like that's been a transition in the last 30, 40 years, but it's part of the whole process. You know, we've had some people try and come join our team that couldn't quite get through the paperwork for one reason or another, or something happened. And it's just, you know, that's across the board, but that was different. So that way you could pick people up to join the team if you needed somebody quickly. You know, there's a lot of the old stories of, you know, guys driving vans by the adult drinking establishments after hours and picking up workforce for the next day back in the thing. You know, it was just a different, you know, we've raised our bar, which is good, but at the same time that has created, you know, we're a little bit more selective than we were maybe 20, 40 years ago.
You know, another thing for it is you know, a couple contractors that you talk with, interact with, that still are the only contractor in the town they are.
Yep.
Right. And so if you're in a smaller town, that can happen. But even in a bigger town, there'd be a certain number of people. But when you do, just in Ford's example of Tuscaloosa, you know, of the auto industry moving into that area, but whether it be Tennessee or Alabama, like they just built towns in the middle of nowhere, you know, or built industry in the middle of nowhere. And then you have to try and support that, you know? And so I think that's the other thing that sort of plays to what you were saying, Brian, about that there's more opportunity, is all of a sudden there was a guy, and I don't remember, it was somebody I knew down the shore, and they were like, my son or grandson is looking for a job. He wants to be an operator. And he lives in PA. I was like, well, that's great. You know, like I'd be glad to talk to him. They're like, well, but he wants to work in Nashville. Oh. And I was like, well, okay. Like, has he ever been to Nashville? And they're like, no, but like now he just said Nashville is supposed to be really like an amazing place and it's up and coming and all these things. And so he just went to Nashville and said like, okay, I'm going to find a job there, because the reality is if you look at the number of tower cranes, you could surely find a job doing something because they're building so fast. And so that's the other thing, is that I think some of the younger workforce may have elected to relocate, you know, because much like you can work remotely, in a different sense, we can't work remotely, but we can elect where we want to work, you know. So if guys want to be in a warmer climate or a drier climate, or, you know, further from a city or closer to a city, there's a lot more mobility than there used to be.
Because there are so many options.
Because there's so many options. Yeah. So in that sense, maybe there are, you know, I would sort of go against what I just said, that there are probably more options. I don't think there's more options in a microcosm. Like locally, I feel like the number's probably not that different than it was 30, 40 years ago. The names might be different, but the numbers aren't that different. Yeah.
I think another thing that has happened to our industry is that we've gotten a lot more white collar. And, you know, there's so much more paperwork than there used to be. There's so much more administrative stuff than there used to be. You know, I think I told the story before the podcast. I knew a guy that ran a company probably bigger than we are, and it was him and his wife, and everybody else was in the field. There wasn't the level of paperwork that is required nowadays for certain things. And so, you know, there's a lot of people, you know, when we go to some of these tech schools to talk to, you know, potential, a lot of them are project management. That is like if they're in construction, they kind of want the, we'll call it white collar of the construction. They want to do the project management, not the actual project. And that's what that's something that a lot of the schools can put out, because it's much more controllable than it is to put out team members that actually, you know, because the investment it takes to have a tech school where they actually do the equipment piece versus just the classroom piece.
Right. Yeah. So that's what I was going to say next. So like, you know, we've talked a lot about why the problem exists, but what are the solutions? I mean, what are we doing here at Berg to try and solve the problem? So
there's a couple different groups that we're in that we support with different levels of schooling, whether it be a tech school or a 2-year college. And we get involved in that and try and support them and try and be engaged and just interact and sort of share the narrative, you know, like who are we? Who is the industry? What are the opportunities? And I know when I go, one of the big things I focus on, Bri, is I'm not actually trying to hire any of them, right? Like in other words, what I'm trying to do is to get people to really value that the industry has a lot of options And whatever the specific thing you want to do, whether it be a big company, a little company, a local company, a company somewhere else, the civil work or the actual construction work, whatever it is, there's so many opportunities. And I try and shed light on the lifestyle that can provide and the feeling that comes from, seeing your work accomplish something every day, to try and get those younger people to say, this is where I want to be. And at least keep them in the industry in a funnel that's going in our direction, and one of the groups I'm in is with one of the really big companies locally. And Ford and I were just talking about it. And I said, they really are taking the approach that a rising tide raises all boats. And it's really interesting because it's a company that we would compete with, and the other people in the group all would be competing. We are definitely, we definitely cross each other's paths in bidding work on multiple levels with these companies. But each of us is really trying to just increase the overall number. Because if you increase the overall number, then you can fall back on your own culture, on your own belief system, on how you operate, and say, I believe we can find people who suit us and who want to be a part of our team, if the people are there. So I know personally, that's one of the approaches I've really taken, is I don't walk in there trying to convince you to work for me.
Right.
I walk in there convincing you've made a good choice, and here's what your life could look like in this industry. Here's what the expectations are. I mean, it's going to be cold. It's going to be wet. The days are going to be long. I'm not going to, I'm not going to be dishonest about that. But, I'll try and bring a couple of our guys with us that, are younger, and let people see like they've started down that path and they're making a life for themselves, and it's viable, and what they enjoy about it. Because that's really the big thing, is to get that next generation. Because that is probably part of the other problem, is I don't want to say our parents' generation, but probably our parents' generation to the age group just 10 years above us did a lot of work. And they really maintained a stronghold on those roles, on the actual operator roles, on the excavator operators and the trackhoe operators and the loaders and dozers, the actual specialty people, whether it be doing pipe work, especially in the crash of 08. When 08 happened, we've talked about that, and it's been a while since we talked about it, but it gutted the industry of a lot of people, because companies had to take a really hard look at themselves and say, if I can only keep, 80% of my people, who are the 80%? And most of them kept the most skilled of their workers, figuring I can hire those other guys back when it comes back. But in the meantime, they found these other jobs and they just didn't come back.
Right. Yeah.
And that's really, in my mind, while it was probably a process that happened over 40 years, since 2008 is when it really got bad, because those people left the workforce and they didn't come back.
When I think about it too, I was just thinking about your families, right? So like, your dad did construction related stuff, with his engineering and different things. Your dad, was in the construction world. But then to the next generation. And besides yourself, your other siblings aren't really tied to construction very much. Your siblings aren't tied to it very much. And, I think about it for my wife's family. None of them have any connection to the construction world. I think, if we go back a couple generations, every family had a tie.
Someone. Yeah.
Now I look at my family and we're all tied. So it's like, but like,
you're offsetting us.
Yes. Well, but I mean,
Thank you for keeping the balance for
the kids are growing up in that world. Whereas if everybody grew up in a corporate world, the kids don't even understand, like they don't have a connect to the actual thing. So, I mean, I think you were talking about those different schools, but I mean, I think we're trying to go younger too. I think like a couple of weeks we're going to a school, like young kids too, because at least trying to get them some connect to this world. Because if they lose that, it's not even, we're not blaming faults here, but they don't even have a tie to it. So why would they even think about it?
Yeah.
And then the other thing is, I think it's interesting is there's a lot of people in our industry that don't want their children to follow their footsteps. And that's been a thing for years. It's like, oh, I'm glad my kid didn't follow my footsteps. He's off doing something else.
Right. Go do something better.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. Yeah.
And it's like, okay, that's kind of like you're telling that to your family as you're providing for them. And then the kids hearing that, and it just kind of perpetuates that problem of people, because that kid would know a lot about it because his dad was in it. But his dad's like, I'm glad he didn't get involved in this.
Well, I think that has so much to do with how we try and market ourselves. You know what I mean? In other words, like if we stop talking bad about this industry and it just becomes a really good profession, you know, construction, blue collar, then we can get back to that sort of thinking. Because it's you triggered me to think sort of a couple different things, Ford. Number one is certainly my dad wanted me to go to college. He did not want me to just go to work. He said, you know, and he would say, like, he said, I had to work my whole life. Like, I want you to be able to have a different choice, right? And I understand letting people have a different choice, but there's a difference between having a choice and funneling people, you know? And Brian and I sort of had a discussion. We talked about it, I think it was on a podcast, where I said, nobody grows up wanting to be Howie Roseman. They don't want to be the general manager.
Right.
Everybody wants to be the player, right? And in our industry, you look at it when they have like the kids touch trucks thing or the big equipment stuff, you know, like at the girls' school, I'll bring like a really tiny track hoe for their Halloween celebration thing and we'll decorate it. And we do that with the, you know, trick or trunk, and we do it with different things. Kids love equipment, not girls, not boys, just kids.
Right.
Because it's big and it's interesting and they, you know, but we don't put that on as something you'd be interested in. And then somehow between the age of like 7 and 14, we lose it because we don't put any follow through in. We put follow through into everything else, into, you know, math and science. And then we all do it. I think if you really want to talk about skilled labor shortage, you can't talk about fixing it today and you can't talk about fixing it tomorrow. You have to say, what are we going to do to make a commitment so that 10 years from now, this shortage doesn't still exist? Now, you're actively trying to fix the shortage right now. But the reality is, you know, Ford and I's kids are younger. How do Ford and I raise the girls in a way that they both have the opportunity to do whatever it is they want to do? Because as parents, that's what we want to do, give them every opportunity.
Right. But
also realize that opportunity exists everywhere. Opportunity doesn't just exist as being in some Fortune 500 company. It could exist in working in a family-owned business locally, you know, right 10 miles from where you grew up, and building that into something. And it being a plumbing company or, you know, an electrical, you know, anything, any of the trades it could be, and you could build that thing. So I think that's important, is that how do we alter the narrative so that as parents, we don't do the same thing where we say, to be successful, you have to do this, right? Because that trickles into so many other things we could talk about. I mean, it's part of the reason college can cost what it can cost.
Sure.
Is because there's such a demand for college. And as I've said, the reality is you go to wherever you want to go, whether it be the beach or the mountains or wherever, and look at the person who's 40-something and successful, and he is not a lawyer or doctor. You know, he is somebody who worked from the time they were young and built something of value and then are able to enjoy that. Now, if you look at the person, you know, and I'll just completely stereotype, but you look at the person that's like 70 and driving a Rolls Royce, that's probably a doctor or lawyer. But it took him a long time to get by the other person, and life happened in that window. You know, so I feel like our industry, construction as a whole, blue collar world, allows people to live a good life, a good lifestyle, while they're still young, while they're raising their families, because they're not paying off tremendous debt that they've incurred to try to go to college to be something so that someday they can make it. You know, I think that you can have, in a world that demands like instant gratification, ironically, I think that the blue collar world gives it to you more easily than other options.
Yeah.
I think also that, like, you know, when you're around a lot of owners in this industry that are older, you know, they're a little hardened, right? And so they don't have solutions. They'd rather just talk about how bad it is.
Or how it used to be.
You know, it's just constant like that. And, you know, the news vibes it in. And so you're just constantly on that reel of just like, oh, back in the day, it was like this. And the reality is, like, no matter what, we're all driving electric cars someday. Construction is always needed. And so the reality is, I don't think any of us have the answer right now, but we're trying everything we can because we have to find a solution. And I think, you know, Dan has a correct thing in that the long term is the play, but we have to still be able to work today, tomorrow, and the next week. So we're trying things in term, short term, long term at the same time, because you can't just focus on one of them. Right. Or you drop off too much. So it's basically just everything all at the same time.
Yeah. And something you said a few minutes ago, Dan, I think is important. at the trade schools, it's good, but like kids need to know that that's an option in the first place. So like somehow being in front of or continuing to expose different generations of the options that they have early on, I think is kind of a critical path to finding the future workforce, making sure that they're aware that this can create a really healthy lifestyle, give them options like you suggested. One thing I was thinking as you guys were talking too, we talked a lot about like other people educating, right? So like, whether it be the 2-year trade schools, the career and technology centers, is there a role for employers themselves to say like, we're going to take people and show them that this is a better option than a McDonald's or a Walmart or whatever it might be, because so I'm just thinking, I've served on the school board, right? And I think that some schools do it really well. That's kind of the multiple paths to graduation, like figuring out where you might fit. But some kids, no matter what, sort of get lost in the wash, right? They're not actively participating. They're not pursuing it. They're sort of getting by in high school. And in some ways I can relate to that. For a long time, I sort of just got by in high school. And I fortunately had parents who really pushed me and said, no, you got to go do something. But that's not everyone's situation or story. And some of those kids are leaving school and saying, well, I'm not going to college because that's not the right option for me. But I don't know what other options I have. So they just go get like the first job that's advertising $16 or $17 an hour, which is your McDonald's, your fast food, your Walmarts. And I think that, I think there might be a role for employers in the construction industry to say like, how do we get to those kids and say, nope, it's okay. Like you don't have anything, but we can turn you into something. And then the other piece of that we've talked about is, all right, if you're going to invest in turning them into something, how do you retain them?
Right. No, I mean, I think that's 100%. Everyone has to do that. If you don't do that, you're really in trouble. Because we always talk about it. You don't need the skills. You need the will to. And right. So I think that is the delta, maybe, if someone is, and, some people bloom later, maybe be 25 till they figure it out, might be 40 till they figure it out. Like age doesn't matter. We're talking a lot about the younger people, but might be someone that's 40 that finally figures it out. Doesn't really matter. But I mean, we're always at the point where if someone wants to, we want to. Mm-hmm. It's just a question of if they want to, because, first couple months, years, weeks, it's not a gravy train, like let's not put butter on it and act like it's cool, because you're going to, but if you're willing to do it and stick to it, we talked about it on the previous podcast. In a smaller company, your chance of advancement is so quick in construction in general, not just our company, but just in general, the advancement opportunities are endless. And so, if the little bit of try goes a long way, and, trying to meet the people where they are when you can, and working with it, it's just a question. Then once they come in, and they get some skills, then what's the next step for them? Mm-hmm. That's always the challenge.
Yeah. There's so much there that we could spin out into. A couple things came to mind. One is when you have the person who's coming out and they want to take the first thing, and it's, $16 working at McDonald's. And you say, well, the old argument would be that you're making the same to do hard labor as you would to just stand there and take an order.
Sure.
Right. And why would you do that? But I think that that's where the narrative piece comes in. That but look at the opportunity that exists, for where would you be if you took that $16 an hour job, flipping fries versus learning a trade.
Yeah.
I think the other thing that comes to mind when we talk about this is that some of the companies out there are doing a really good job of training people. I mean, I feel like we do a good job of getting people more knowledge. And it sort of reminds me of some other discussions we'd had. There's a difference between having a good training program and effectively training people.
Sure.
Right. So, and I think that we effectively increase people's ability and their skill set.
Yeah.
have never been able to build a training program that we could provide the people enough time to really invest in our own people because we're busy going.
Right.
We got to get done. We got to get done. But we know some companies out there that really put significant effort into and cost into training. So the opportunity is there. And sometimes that might be what helps you decide which company to go to.
Right.
Which path is you? Are you somebody that wants to sit in a classroom environment and learn how to do this? Or are you somebody that wants to get out in the field and figure it out, and it's not going to be easy? And that might help make the decision. The other thing I thought about when you were talking about schools and that window between the tech school, let's say, and when people would have interest in it, is you go back and we've completely lost when I was in middle school, I had metal class, I had wood class, like woodworking class. I had an auto shop class, you know what I mean? I had a home ec class, you know what I mean? Like it exposed me to each of these things that in theory, it seemed like irrelevant at the time, honestly, to me. Like it was it was neat. It was fun to make things out of metal and use a lathe and whatever, it was neat. But I hadn't really considered that's what I would do. I just was not mentally there, sort of like you said at school. I wasn't thinking this is a good way to test out what do I want to be. And I even had an engineering thing, and I've said that I thought I was actually really good at it. And it's probably something I should have realized at the time, or someone should have realized to say maybe this is something you should focus on. Mm-hmm. But that's gone. Even if we've done a good job of bringing back tech schools and making it that it's not that you go to Vokey, right? That we've changed that narrative a little bit. What we haven't done is make any effort to reintroduce it into mainline schooling where it becomes some regular thing. Charlotte just did some after school thing. She wanted to sew. And so she can sew. Her mom, Erin, showed her how to sew. And so Erin said, okay, there's this extracurricular thing. Charlotte was so disgusted, honestly. And we're really happy with a lot of things about where they go to school. But she said, they taught me how to put the thread through the needle and put it in a button. I could already do that. Charlotte was thinking they were going to teach her how to sew in 1 hour, which was unrealistic. Right. Yep. But at 10 years old, the expectation is the desire is sort of there. If a company could make the commitment to donate to a middle school, let's say, and provide, I feel like insurance would make it a nightmare, but provide a skid loader, give them a skid loader and pay for the trainer.
Right.
I bet you'd be shocked at how many kids would sign up for just the opportunity to run around in a little machine, a little excavator and dig a hole.
Yeah. You just said something that we can't get around, and we've tried. I mean, tried, but
the insurance factor,
the insurance,
the exposure
age
risk
factor,
liability.
When I was a kid, first job that wasn't for my parents, I was in second grade. There was the ability to try stuff earlier.
Yeah,
and we've had kids come in here that want to be part of this industry, and we've had to turn them away because they weren't old enough yet. And so, we're kicking ourselves. We can't do anything about it. Our hands are tied on some of these things, but maybe there is some other, maybe we have to look at it differently. Is maybe what I'm kind of getting at through my talking this through is that we have to find a different path because there is those kids that are interested, but we have no way of connecting with them besides verbally because of how the rules are set up, and we can't mess with that. Yeah.
One thing you said there that always strikes a chord with me is giving people the opportunity for success. It's not how you said it, but it's hard to expect somebody to be able to do something if you've never given them a chance to do something. Right. Can they try the machine? Can they use it somewhere? And it does remind me of situations in my life where people were just try it, I worked in the maintenance department of a bank for a long time. And, I had a couple of older guys who were just we've got a lot of stone to move and we're not going to do all of it. So you get in the skid loader and you start moving. And I was I have no idea how to make this thing move. They're well, you're going to find out today. So, and it just out of necessity and sometimes, but somebody needs to let you try something in order to figure out if you can excel at it or not. So this is a tough one. And there are a lot of ideas and a lot of things that I think are working well, but there are no like easy fixes. There's no silver bullets here.
There's no red easy button from Staples here.
No, yeah, but that's okay. Sometimes things are hard for a reason, and it's not because it was supposed to be easy. It's because it's supposed to be fulfilling. So, you know, when you do things that are hard, you can look back and say, I did that. So, that's kind of construction in general. So,
Yes.
that's a good place to wrap it up. Thanks for joining us today, folks. We hope you got something from this, and we hope you come back for another episode.